Recently, a district court case out of Alabama declared that an employee looking to press charges against military chemical and weapons manufacturer Northrop Grumman had no claim. The employee, whose name is not listed in the case, claimed that they had received harassment, bias, and ultimately were pushed out of their position due to them being transgender. The employee filed a claim against Northrop Grumman for alleged sexual discrimination under Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act and disability discrimination under the 1990 Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. The plaintiff's claims were dismissed due to an overlooked flaw of the ADA, which can be argued as an antiquated clause in the bill which disqualifies transgender individuals to be able to claim rights through the Act if they suffer from gender identity disorder or what is now recognized by the DSM-5 as gender dysphoria. Specifically, the ADA has exclusions for rights coverages listed in Title IV of the Act, which specifies that certain conditions do not qualify for or are not recognized as disabilities. Part A of Title IV exclusions covers homosexuality and bisexuality, recognizing that a person's sexual preference or identity are not necessarily disabilities. Part B of Title IV's exclusions covers certain conditions and states, under this chapter, the term disability shall not include transvestism, transsexualism, pedophilia, exhibitionism, voyeurism, gender identity disorders not resulting from physical impairments, or other sexual behavior disorders. The wording in the bill is controversial by modern standards as it groups transgender people as having a sexual behavior disorder, which being a transgendered person is not. It is also highly negative and demeaning as it groups transgender people among pedophiles who are considered the most disgraceful criminals in society today. While it may be rational to agree that someone's sexuality does not qualify them as having a disability, being transgender is not a sexual identity or preference. Transgender people may be gay, lesbian, straight, or asexual in the same way a cisgendered person may be. Leaving sexual identity out of the ADA makes sense, as being challenged for your sexual identity is a civil rights violation and not necessarily a disabilities issue. However, in the case of the unnamed plaintiffs suing Northrop Grumman and other trans folk who have looked to the ADA to protect their rights, these people are classified among sexual deviants in society, and their trans identity is seen as a sexuality issue and not a disabilities discrimination issue. Non-transgender folk are diagnosed with a multitude of different mental illnesses due to them struggling with their existence and identity, and the majority of DSM-classified mental illnesses are covered by the ADA. Therefore, if a person diagnosed with clinical depression or anxiety is discriminated at work due to their mental illness or unable to do their job due to their mental illness, they have the right to sue their employer or the right to collect disability benefits based upon their mental illness. While transgender folk can be diagnosed as having clinical depression or anxiety, for the most part, those who are transgender are diagnosed primarily with gender dysphoria. As listed by the DSM-5, this condition is associated with clinically significant distress or impairment in social, school, and other important areas of functioning, which some might say can be seen as quite disabling. Further, the DSM-5 states gender dysphoria, along with atypical gender expression, is associated with high levels of stigmatization, discrimination, and victimization, leading to negative self-concept, increased rates of mental disorder comorbidity, school dropout, and economic marginalization, including unemployment with attendant social and mental health risks. The National Transgender Discrimination Survey found that 63% of participants experienced serious acts of discrimination. These acts of discrimination, including job loss due to bias, eviction due to bias, school bullying, dropout, teacher bullying, physical assault due to bias, sexual assault due to bias, homelessness due to gender identity and expression, loss of relationship with family, denial of medical services, and incarceration due to gender identity and expression, all disabling these folks from being able to live the lives that they want to lead. It is arguable that while gender dysphoria or gender identity disorder is an internal problem for a trans individual as they work towards consolidating their identity through transition, it is also important to recognize that this struggle is based off society's ideas and ideals of gender performance. By looking at this issue from a queer feminist disabilities theory standpoint, this is simply another issue of heteronormativity and able-bodiedness. The trans individual or body is viewed in the same way the disabled individual or body is, in the way that both are seen as deviant, dangerous, and antithetical to what society views as correct or normal. Both trans and disabled identifying folk challenge society's heteronormative and able-bodied ideas in a multitude of ways. Trans and disabled folk are seen only for their bodies and its functions, and not as individuals with distinct identities within those bodies, as a cisgendered normative person would be. Both trans and disabled folk face discrimination and are disabled through society's views of them, and not necessarily because of what they themselves are capable of. In the case of plaintiff charging Northrop Grumman, who remains unnamed, the plaintiff reported that they were told that they would not be allowed to be deployed through their military position, as their supervisor was concerned that something might happen to the plaintiff because of their rapidly developing female characteristics, sexual preferences, even though they had not been discussed, and their transitioning. The plaintiff was then let go of from their position as they were deemed unable to do their job if they could not be deployed. While disabled folk do not receive the same pushback due to sexuality always, many disabled people have gone through similar experiences where they were deemed unable, even though they were able, because an outside able-bodied heteronormative person felt that their disability might upset the other people in their rank. While a diagnosis of gender dysphoria may be the first step a trans person receives in their mental health journey, it could also act as another barrier, disabling them from accessing rights that a different diagnosis would qualify for. When looking at the issue of trans people being specifically unincluded for rights protections by the ADA, it is important to recognize that this is another case of society deeming a specific group of people too far out of norm to be worth helping. The exclusion of trans people with a diagnosis of gender dysphoria is a result of viewing disability, gender, and sexuality through an outdated moral model of disability. Trans people with a diagnosis of gender dysphoria are posited as degenerate or evil, beyond the scope of normal human behavior, and put next to pedophiles and those who flash their genitals at strangers. If we instead view trans people with a diagnosis of gender dysphoria through the social model of disabilities, we can see how trans folk are not inherently disabled, but as a society, we disable them through legal barriers such as exclusion from ADA protection. If a physically disabled person finds themselves unable to do their jobs due to not having proper physically enabling conditions or harassment based upon their disability, they can claim their rights given by the ADA are being compromised. A transgendered person, like the person who charged against Northrop Grumman, that faces the same or similar limitations but does not have the same ability, regardless of the fact that they are being disabled by their work environment or society. Due to the language of the ADA, those who are trans with a gender dysphoria diagnosis are unable to file for the same benefits as those whose mental health leaves them with a clinically significant distress in their lives. The ADA's exclusion of gender dysphoria therefore does not support cases of trans folk who experience undue duress in work or life due to their gender identity, not because they themselves struggle with it, but because of the duress that is created due to the discrimination and the disability they face due to being trans.